Hello, my name is Robert Kaplan. I am the Chief Geopolitical Analyst for Stratfor, and I'm joined here today with Stratfor's East Asia Analyst, John Minnich, and we are going to discuss a whole gamut of issues related to China. What's been in the news lately, John, has been this seemingly massive, seemingly unprecedented anti-corruption drive, where Xi Jinping, China's president and party leader, is going after some pretty senior people. Now, is this a great purge by another name? Like Stalin physically purged people. Is Xi getting rid of them in a more elegant style than Stalin did? What's going on here?
Yeah, I'm not sure that it merits the name Great Purge just yet, but it is certainly the case that what we're seeing right now in China is unprecedented. We haven't seen anything like this in at least 2 decades. That means 2 presidential administrations, and perhaps not since the time of Mao himself. We've already seen, for instance, almost 200,000 officials all across China either probed or detained. And we're talking about officials at every level of government and across at least 5 or 6 different sectors and within some of China's most powerful bureaucratic institutions like the National Development and Reform Commission. So what we're seeing now is certainly different from what we've seen in previous administrations. And I think part of the reason to understand the true significance of the anti-corruption campaign, I think we have to look at the context. So not focus necessarily on what Xi Jinping himself is doing right now or what he may do in the next 6 to 8 months to come, but on where this is taking place or where China is when this is taking place. And that context is essentially that you have a Chinese government that is at the end of a phase, a political economic phase. And that phase was characterized or defined by 2 core pillars. One was low-end exports. So for several decades, China's economy has been driven by a low-cost export boom. And the other one was state-led investment into housing construction, housing and infrastructure construction. And both of those vehicles, these were the pillars of economic and therefore social and political stability for decades. And both of those vehicles are more or less spent at this point. So the government recognizes it's going to have to shift China qualitatively, fundamentally to a new economic system. And that new economic system is one that is based on domestic consumption. But doing so implies many, many changes to the way the entire political system works in China. And not only are they trying to do this very difficult shift, but they're trying to do it in a very short time. So the United States made this shift. Japan made this shift, but they did so over the course of half of a century. China's doing it in 10 years, really in 5 to 7 years. And what that means is that the next 5 to 7 years are going to be very difficult, very destabilizing, with very high potential for crises of a huge variety of sorts. And the government is looking at this and recognizing that if they are going to withstand these crises, if they're going to guide China through this process, they're going to have to reshape the way that they work. So what Xi is doing with this anti-corruption campaign is consolidating his place, clearing out the obstacles to reform, and also on a deeper level, reshaping the moral foundations of the party, trying to get to a place and of the nation, trying to get to a place where the party's legitimacy isn't based on its promise of rising material prosperity, but on the fact that the party is the vehicle for realizing the greatness of the Chinese nation, in a sense.
And that gets us in to the relationship between the party and the military, because China is in the midst of projecting power outwards in the East and South China Seas, the way the United States projected power outwards in the Greater Caribbean after it consolidated itself as a nation at the turn of the 20th century. So it seems to me that as China's economy and society begin a phase of going through massive crises, there's going to be a tendency to dial up the nationalist card in the East and South China Sea and elsewhere in order to replace communism with nationalism.
Exactly. And it's not in any way a coincidence that the military has been one of the key targets of the anti-corruption campaign. And in line with the anti-corruption campaign targeting the military and targeting various bureaucracies, we've also seen President Xi Jinping begin to establish what he calls leading small groups. So there's a leading small group in the economy. There's an equivalent to that in the military as well. It's a National Security Council, more or less modeled off of the United States National Security Council. And the idea behind this is to give Xi control over the military so they can use the military as a vehicle for defining the greatness of the Chinese nation. Of course, that implies a lot of problems, which is that as China pushes out, the rest of the region pushes back. So not just Japan, but also...
And China's going to need energy for this.
Exactly.
It's going to need oil, natural gas. It's going to need pipelines, bringing hydrocarbons across the Indian Ocean interstate and everything in order to make this shift.
Right, and that's the underlying constraint on China, and that's something that really is actually qualitatively new for China. For most of its history, had most of the resources it needed at home. Now China depends on these global sea lines of communication for the resources that keep its economy going. And without those supply lines secure, it can't operate. So that's the underlying structural element pushing all of this forward.
All right. Well, we'll see where we go from here. Obviously, a lot of issues that all intersect with each other. Thank you for joining us. This was John Minnich, Stratfor's East Asia analyst, and I'm Robert Kaplan. Thank you.
Thank you.